Hi and welcome to another episode of the Getting Things Done podcast from Vital Learning. I am Morten Røvik, and as always I'm here with my good friend and colleague Lars Rotskil Henriksen. Привет, Lars!
Привет, Morten. Good to see you as always, and as always good to be with our listeners and viewers out there. We always start off with a quick reminder of the purpose of the podcast, which is to help you learn GTD or become even better GTDers. I'm sure that today's episode will support you in that. If you are new to GTD, we always recommend you go back and listen to the first episodes that we made, episodes 1 through 6, where we cover why what the value for us is in GTD, and then each of the 5 steps. You'll find that in the audio version. Today's episode number is number 128 of the podcast, and today's episode is another interview episode. Yay!
Whee! Yes, I have had the great pleasure of interviewing a very interesting guy. His name is Peter Gallant. Peter is a professor of innovation, strategy and entrepreneurship at Smith School of Business, Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. So, and this episode is focusing on a lot of various topics, and as we jokingly talked about before we started the recording with Peter, was that he said, "You may guess what I am on the Kairos scale," and I did, and I'm sure you guys who knows what Kairos is will guess how Peter is faring there. So we are talking about how Peter's journey with GTD and how it has shaped him as an entrepreneur and in his life overall. How his Ph.D. work in engineering using AI and for data and time series analysis sparked his first startup in the late 1990s, and how GTD played a major role in his semi-retirement plan at age 50. So if that sounds interesting, if you have an entrepreneur in your, then you should follow along. So, but before we get there, Lars, you have some introductions to do about the summer camp. Maybe you want to mention that here before we start?
We could also do that. So at the summer camp, we do that every year. We've done that for 5 years now. It's a great place to meet other GTDers, hang out, and deepen your GTD skills and refresh your system and get some new perspectives, new inputs. Those of us who have been there all along, at least, really appreciate this. So I highly recommend that you join us if you can. And as of this, the recording time right now, we have the first planning meeting about to be scheduled in the calendar. So we will get started on the 2026 edition. You can always email me to be notified when we open up for signups. I have a list of people to notify, so email me directly if you want to be notified when the signups open. Previous participants from previous years will automatically be notified. But send me an email, lars@vitallearning.dk. I'll let you know when it opens up, or if you're listening to this in the future, gtdsummercamp.com is the starting point to find out more about the next summer camp.
Yes, and I think that do you have the dates already?
We don't have them set in stone yet, so I don't want to mention them. But it's usually I think second weekend in June, so around that time. But let's not promise anything yet right now.
And June in Denmark is beautiful, so consider participating. So
love to see you there.
Okay, yeah. And I suggest then that we just roll the interview.
And now, our special guest.
I'm very happy today to have Peter Gallant at our podcast. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Morten. I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, and did I pronounce your name correctly? Is Gallant or Gallant or?
I answer to practically anything, but Peter Gallant is the most common pronunciation.
Gallant. Okay, yes. Thank you. Just setting me straight there. So Peter, you and I have been hooking up as we both know David Allen, and we've been talking about it could be fun and interesting for our listeners and viewers to meet you and learn about your travel towards GTD and your interesting career. So could you just start us off with who is Peter and what does he do and what does he do now?
Well, that's a big question. I'm still trying to figure out who Peter is, but I live currently in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, which is about a 2.5 hour drive east of Toronto. Unlike Europe, you can drive in Canada for 2.5 hours and still be in the same province and not even quite be at the next city. Whereas if you do that in Europe, you're in like the next country or one or two countries. But I live in a relatively small town east of Toronto. I was born in Toronto and lived in Australia for a couple of years when I was a kid. My dad was a consulting engineer, so we traveled a little bit. And so I went to high school in Toronto and got very interested in computer technology during high school. The PCs were first coming out. And then I went to university and I studied electrical and computer engineering at a university called Queen's University, which is located here in Kingston. And I loved university so much, I kind of never left. I started studying electrical engineering undergraduate. I did some work with the school in the summers as I was in second and third year. And after my fourth year, I literally took the weekend off, and then I started a master's in electrical engineering on May 1st and worked on a master's degree doing research using artificial intelligence and neural networks, which were virtually brand new at the time because this is in the late 1990s. I was using neural networks to control artificial limbs to enhance the ability of an amputee to control an artificial limb by processing muscle signals. And that got me really interested in signal processing and artificial intelligence and neural networks. And then I read a paper that literally changed my life. And it was not GTD, because GTD wasn't out quite then. But it was a paper that talked about how astronomical data from observing stars that are a very, very far distance away actually had a bit of predictability in it. It had some structure to the data. It wasn't a purely random process. And so I ended up doing a PhD as well in artificial intelligence-based neural network and genetic algorithm-based signal processing to predict time series processes that are hard to predict. So that took the first 30 years of my life to kind of get to that point. And then the really interesting stuff started to happen because on campus, I was developing prediction systems using neural networks and using genetic algorithms to help evolve the network structures. And on campus, I was doing that to predict atmospheric distortion processes to correct the optics of big ground-based telescopes. But off campus, I got that kind of entrepreneurial bug. And off campus, I started modeling financial products, interest rate and currency futures. And that really began my journey into entrepreneurship by commercializing my PhD research.
That's an amazing career and very impressive. And AI in 1999, that sounds like, who knew at that time?
Because Jeffrey Hinton had just published some of the original papers in kind of the basics of how to train neural networks, and they were being applied in all sorts of areas. It was a really interesting time. AI was in its infancy. The applications were only just beginning. And of course, now it's exploded because a lot of the AI now is kind of natural language or large language model based AI. And I'm by no means an expert in that. But what it also gave me was my first experience in taking technology that I developed And I just didn't want those research papers and that technology to kind of sit on a shelf after it had been published. I
Yeah.
really thought that the value of doing research to me is when we can translate that research into impactful products that people use and deliver enough value that they're willing to pay for it. And that's magic, Morton. When you
Yeah.
can do that, that's a magical time in the journey of any entrepreneur. Is the first
Yeah.
time you actually create something and you're like, oh my gosh, this is crap. Nobody's going to be interested. And then all of a sudden somebody buys it. And that's magic. I
Yeah, it
love that
is.
to this day.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I've been using a term. I think I don't know if this is actually a term at all. Is I just made it up, or not just now, but I made it up earlier. If you take something that could be be productified, is the term. You take something, create a product, and then
Productify.
yeah, so you take an idea and productify it. That means to create a product out of it, so that's or a service out of it that somebody wants to buy, and
Yeah.
and that from that idea to something someone can buy. It's and that's a very I think that's a lot of where a lot of the failures in entrepreneurships happen, is that you are not able to understand what someone could be interested in buying, and you fail to bring it to market. And talking about failure, you have failed as well in, in your
Yeah, and
startup.
it's interesting. Yeah, and you know what? I think it's really important to acknowledge that entrepreneurship is not a low risk activity, right?
No, it's not.
And it's not a career in a traditional sense. And I just got up last night. I teach an entrepreneurship course at my local university, and we'll probably talk about what I'm doing now in a few minutes. And
Yeah.
I get up there and I say, I failed. When I
Mm-hmm.
talk about my background, I say I failed. And I can say that to a group of people I don't know. And I can say that with confidence because failure is part of the entrepreneurial game. Now, I think you
Yeah.
can certainly minimize the risk of failure. And part of that is, as you said, is knowledge, and it's knowledge of what you're building for who. And you shouldn't just kind of imagine that, right? It shouldn't exist merely in your head. You've got to get out there and identify a value proposition, treat it like a hypothesis that could be right, it could be wrong, and then start talking to actual customers. And I'm amazed, Morton, at the number of times I work with an entrepreneur, either as a consultant or as some sort of service to the entrepreneurial community in my community. And we talk for a while, and I say, well, how many actual customers have you talked to about this? And sometimes they'll drop their head and look away, and the answer is like
Customers.
none.
Yeah.
Like you're about to bet your life, you're about to quit your job, you're about to go and borrow money and put your house on the line, but you haven't talked to any customers. And so, though I've made those mistakes as well. I've built products that nobody wants,
Yeah.
right? You should all do that at least once in your life just to have the experience. But then you kind of say, hey, maybe there's a better way. And so, that's what I learned in my first startup, where I took my on-campus technology, I created financial analytical models, and it ended up kind of turning into like an AI analytics consultancy, for lack of a better word. We had a couple of customers, and we were also trading our own account on the Chicago Board of Trade, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, by predicting fluctuations in interest rate and currency futures. But at the end of the day, it was morphing into a lifestyle business that was kind of going to stay flat. And I probably could have earned a nice salary for me and my team at the time. But that's not what I really was interested in. I'd raised some external capital, and investors are looking for growth. And when it became evident that I couldn't deliver that growth, it was time to pivot. So my first failure was actually a failure to grow. I created a lifestyle business when I really was aiming to create a growth-based business. And I went back to my investors and said, look, this business is not going to grow in the ways and at the rate that we had originally intended. Let's go and do something else. And to make a long story short, my investors supported the idea of me and my team going into what we call opportunity scan mode and starting to look for other opportunities that could leverage the expertise of our team and to leverage the capital that we still had in the bank. And we ended up looking at about 40 different technologies, a lot of them in software. I'm not a huge fan of software only plays, because anything that I can write in software in a year, somebody else will be able to write in 6 months, a little bit later. So I was interested in identifying a real problem, a critical unmet need that also required a solution that had some depth to it, some technical depth. And so that search took a while. And what we identified was a really interesting technology being developed at the university to detect bacteria in water. And up until then, when we started to look at what water plant operators were doing, especially in small communities, they were taking a 100 milliliter water sample and sending it away to a testing laboratory. And then it was being processed by a technician using a membrane filtration technique, and then visually interpreted after the sample had incubated for 24 hours. And all that really told the water plant operator was that the population shouldn't have consumed the water 48 to 72 hours ago. Right? Yeah. So that's not particularly useful data. So all of a sudden that became interesting, because the technology that was being developed at the university could detect bacteria in as little as 2 hours.
Yeah.
And it didn't require a lab. The vision, not that we were there at the time that I was looking at this, they were doing tests in petri dishes on a lab benchtop, but the long-term vision was a product that could be a laboratory in a box that could be located at the water plant. And by moving the testing closer to the point of sampling, you eliminated all that transport time. So I was starting to get excited. I was starting to see a value proposition form. And the more we investigated that, the more interesting it became as something that was a product that had that critical unmet need. That was the good news.
Yeah. I just want to interject just 2 seconds there, because I know how dangerous E. coli is. One of my second education was at a college for food technology, specializing in food health, and Escherichia coli, which is the Latin name of this, it's not a nice bacteria. You don't want it in your drinking water. You don't want it at all in your environment, because it can really kill you. And
that's right.
So to be able to detect that early and stop, so that that must be quite satisfactory for you to deliver something that really made a difference.
Yeah, and it took a while because the technology was in its infancy. We had to get our test from liquid reagents that didn't have a long shelf life into solid form reagents that had a year of shelf life. We had to figure out a way of simplifying the test so you could run it outside an accredited laboratory by an operator. And we also had to make a machine that could incubate and interpret the test simultaneously. But what I liked about the technology, Morton, was it wasn't just software. We had chemical reagents. We had enzyme substrates. E. coli emits an enzyme called glucuronidase, and we had a reagent that could that was impacted. It was cleaved and broken in half by the presence of that enzyme, and that enzyme is highly selective for E. coli, and that created a fluorescent molecule that went into an optical sensor. So basically, we had a machine that you put the sample in, about the size of a microwave oven. It would incubate the sample in a heated sleeve. It would continuously monitor the optical sensor, and as soon as we detected fluorescence from the enzyme substrate reaction, the alarm you set the alarm off. And so that technology required, I became the founding CEO of that company. We capitalized that company from money from my walking wounded flat first startup. All of my investors who invested in my first startup also invested in my second. So I promised them that if I was going to fail again, I'd fail in some new and creative way, and so to show that I'd learned. And so we started the development process. And along the way, we raised angel investment capital from high net worth individuals. We raised a round of conventional venture capital financing with institutional venture capital. And then we were positioning and shaping up to have to raise about $15 million for our next round of investment. But that was 2008.
Yeah.
Not a great time to be raising capital.
No. We
No.
all know that 2008 and the years after that has been, terrible times for everything that has to do with finance.
Yeah, and if your audience isn't familiar with what happened in 2008, they should watch the movie The Big Short, because that kind of gives them the gist of it. So it became impossible. We had an external risk factor that nobody could predict that made it impossible to raise capital at a time we were running out of money. So we started looking for strategic partners. And all of the major water testing companies that develop technology in this sector all came to small town in Eastern Ontario and had a serious look at our technology. And to make a long story short, an offer was made, and we sold the company to Veolia, which is the world's largest environmental services company. And so it wasn't a huge acquisition in terms of acquisition value. We were still early in the development process, because one of the big milestones when you're developing a water test is that people have to believe it works. And the only way to convince people that it works is to have it approved by the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And this was the only automated microbiology technology that has ever been approved by the US EPA for testing drinking water in the United States. And I was responsible for that approval. It was a really interesting process. It was a technical process. It was a political process. But it was something that I got a lot of satisfaction from. But that approval actually happened post-acquisition. So our valuation was low because we hadn't received that key approval until after we were acquired. I stayed with the acquiring company, with Veolia, for 5 years, commuting to Paris and reporting to Paris. But that was a really interesting time, because I went from a 20-person startup to now being part of a 300,000-person multinational. And that really changes how you operate, and it changes the level of just how you work. And speaking of kind of level of how you work, way back in this entrepreneurial story is really when I first got exposed to GTD and the Getting Things Done book. I actually picked up my first copy of GTD in probably late 2022, just after it came out. And I got serious about implementing it in 2020. Sorry, in 2002. Yeah, not 2022. 2002, just after it came out. And I got serious about implementing it in 2003. And it had, not only did it transform my professional life, it's had probably one of the most profound impacts on my personal life of anything.
Okay. You have to elaborate how.
Yeah, it was interesting because David Allen and I just had dinner in July in Amsterdam. And I said, David, I got to tell you, GTD has had this huge impact on my life. And he kind of laughed and said, yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
So, it's obviously had a huge impact on his life. And so if we kind of explore that a little bit, Morten, I think what appealed to me about GTD, what captured my imagination, was the opening. And if you recall the opening of the book, it says, it's possible to have an overwhelming number of things to do. Okay, check. I'm an entrepreneur. I've got an overwhelming number of things to do, and still function productively with a clear head and a positive sense of relaxed control. And that's burned into my mind, because at the time, as a first-time entrepreneur, I was struggling with just how many different things were on my mind at any given time. And I also had a personal life, I was married, I had a young child, I had just finished my Ph.D. degree, but I was still working on it and some publications when I first started working in the entrepreneurial environment. And so that really appealed to me. That was the beginning of my GTD journey, was early 2003.
Exactly. But just to get back to the personal aspect here, when you started getting things done, you started off, what kind of physical or mental benefits did you get?
And it's interesting because it takes a while to recognize the full benefits of what GTD can offer. And sometimes you have to go through a little bit more anxiety on the front end of that curve before you start to realize a lot of the benefits.
Yeah.
And in a nutshell, this is kind of the way I think about GTD. And every year I do a bonus lecture for my students where I introduce this idea of productivity. And it's interesting. I open that bonus lecture by saying, you know what, we're all knowledge workers, but nobody trains us how to be.
Yep.
We spend all this time and money and effort in universities and learning skills and developing our skills, but nobody is showing us how to harness those skills in a productive way. So you've got to raise, as Stephen Covey once said, you've got to not only raise your ability to be your productivity, you've got to raise your production capacity. And most people haven't thought about that. They have evolved their own habits, and there's things that they do, and most people keep a calendar, as we all know, things like that. But it's actually rare to find somebody, especially early in their career, who's actually sat down and said, wow, I'm going to develop a systematic approach to this.
Yeah.
I'm going to sit down and figure out a way of making sure I'm as productive as I could be. And so when I started reading Getting Things Done, there were a couple of aha moments that really kind of blew my mind, and they took a while for me to really fully digest. And I'm gonna point to maybe three of them just to give you a sense of kind of, they impact you on different levels, right? So one of the immediate impact things when you pick up Getting Things Done and you give it a read is, first of all, it's one of the very few complete productivity methodologies that are out there.
Yep.
You can read books that you pick up tips and tricks, but Getting Things Done is actually a complete defined system.
It is,
right?
a holistic
It's
system.
got everything. Yeah. And as we've talked about before offline, it's got some pillars to it.
Yep.
And those pillars are important foundations of the GTD methodology. But you could read GTD and start to get immediate value from it. So the first thing when I first read GTD was the 2-minute rule.
Yep.
Which, just to make sure we're all on the same page, if something comes into your world that you can completely get and get it done, if it comes into your world and it takes less than 2 minutes to complete, then complete it as soon as it shows up. Don't try to store it for later or record it or defer it. Just get it done. And for me, that really had a huge impact, because a lot of the stuff that you get coming at you as an entrepreneur is kind of tactical things, like a question from a co-founder, or a quick question from an investor, or a customer has a quick follow-on question on a proposal you've sent to them. If you can answer that as soon as it comes in, almost invariably the response is, wow, thanks for the quick reply.
Yeah.
And that helps move things forward, because it's amazing how many projects are stalled because somebody's sitting on an item that would take them only a couple of minutes to complete. So the short-term tactical impact when you read Getting Things Done is there's all sorts of things like that embedded in there. But 2-minute rule is probably the most prevalent.
Yeah.
So at the base level, that had a big impact on my world. But then the next thing that had a really substantial impact was the idea of getting away from managing time. because back then in the 90s, I mean, a lot of people had taken time management courses, and you know how that goes. The instructor gives you a piece of paper and has 15-minute blocks, and you log all of where you spent your time for that entire week on 15-minute blocks. And then the instructor and you review that at the end of the week and said, well, maybe you could have been more efficient here and everything else. But as an entrepreneur, I don't live the same week twice ever.
No, no,
I never have. I don't think any of us really do.
no.
So very quickly, that GTD got me thinking, moving away from thinking about time and instead thinking about managing commitments, identifying what David Allen calls the open loops that are coming at us. And some of those commitments, as you well know, are explicit. Hey, Morton, let's go and get together the next time I'm in Oslo on a certain date. Then that's a defined commitment that we can make, and we can track and manage that. But a lot of commitments that we're encountering, especially if you're an entrepreneur, are more subtle. You're noticing a new employee is struggling, and you need to spend some time with them. You are hoping to get a new client, but you have to spend some time and do some things to help move that relationship along. So, as with all of knowledge work, your work is not always clearly defined, and you have to define it. And so this idea of going from managing time to managing commitments had a huge impact on that, because I started thinking in terms of commitments. And of course, getting things done forces you to write down and capture commitments outside of your own head. That was big.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. There's a law in psychology called Yerkes-Dodson's law.
No.
No, it talks about the commitments you take on from yourself and others. If the number of those exceeds your ability to deliver on them, you get stressed. If you have the right amount of stress, which is where you feel that this is fun, I'm moving forward, it's cool, I'm feeling good about who I am and what I'm doing and what I'm not doing, then you have you are at a good place. But if you have too many things, too many commitments at the same time, you will be stressed, and you can have a burnout, you can have a breakdown, and then it shows up like what you call a camel hump. Where too little stress is not good, because then you don't get up in the morning and nobody's expecting anything of you. Or at the other end, where you are just unable to deliver on anything because you feel over committed. And getting things done helps you structure everything so it's not in your head. And the stress level is manageable because you can move things in and out of focus, as you said. I think that. Sorry.
Yeah, I think they call that eustress. It's the idea of having an amount of stress that motivates you, but it doesn't cause you distress. Yeah, and I agree with that 100%.
And not all stress is bad, of course. It's no. A little, but enough to get you up in the morning and get you running.
Absolutely. And the problem is that a lot of people are lying awake at night with unmanaged commitments that are rattling around in their head and waking them up in the middle of the night. Now, I don't think that's good stress. And then as an entrepreneur, you've got this incredible number of things you're responsible for in your professional life. And so, again, one of the big impactful points was start identifying and capturing commitments outside your head. And then the last big aha, and this probably took me the longest to really realize what the impact was you've got to do it with everything, personally and professionally. Because our brains don't do a good job of differentiating between a commitment we've made professionally and a commitment we've made personally. It's still something that needs to be done. And if it's unmanaged, even if it's a personal commitment, if it's unmanaged, it's still causing that adverse stress that you just referred to, Morton. Yeah. And so the antidote to that is, to me, was sitting down, having read GTD. I probably read it 2 or 3 times, before I sat down and said, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this. And one of the questions that everybody who implements GTD has to answer, and sometimes this requires some good coaching to do, is how am I going to implement GTD? GTD is technology agnostic. It doesn't specify you have to use a computer or a smartphone. I've seen people, and I started out by just using pen and paper in a single journal notebook where I just basically captured everything I was responsible for. And then I started to figure out which were individual next actions versus projects. And that was not a bad way to start, except the problem is that when you start doing things and crossing it out, then you're starting to look back on pages of your notebook for things that aren't crossed out, and it becomes kind of cumbersome. So very quickly I migrated to, back then I migrated to a Palm Pilot, which was a very simple device. It was a device that had not much more capability than basic calendar, but it had a to-do list with different categories that you could scroll through, and you could write on a little handwriting recognition pad. You could capture actions, and it was so small. It's smaller than I think even today's cell phones. It was something that was always with you. And then I got into the habit of, as soon as I identified a commitment, I said, bang, that's a commitment. I've just made a commitment. And now I've got to do something about it. And I developed this kind of habit of immediately capturing things I committed to. So I developed that radar to determine, to identify when I'd made a commitment personally or professionally. And then I started getting really good at capturing it. But that's when I started to run into a bit of trouble. And I'm sure you can imagine what the trouble was.
Let me guess. One or two or both. Is one, you captured too much, everything, and the second, you didn't clarify and organize everything. It's just amount of it overwhelmed your system.
Exactly.
Or do you have a third?
That was the thing, especially when it's combined with one of the things that in the book and in David's seminars that people do sometimes is what they call the mind sweep, right? So you learn the basics of GTD in terms of the old terminology was collect, process, organize, review, do. The new terminology is capture, clarify, organize, reflect, and engage. But the idea being is you're trying to get everything out of your head of all the commitments and trying to identify all those, because you're trying to get to this point of having a complete system. And personally, I think people try to get there too quickly after only a day or two of maybe some introductory training. And that's kind of what happened to me, but there wasn't any of that training really available back then in 2003. I just tried a mind sweep. And as you say, I dumped everything out of my head into my system, and then I sat back and looked at it and said, oh my gosh. And I had this feeling of overwhelm come over me, right?
Grief or relief.
It didn't help. In the short term, it really actually made me think and made me stressed out and made me feel that I was overcommitted. And you know what? I probably was. But the system just made that all, put it right in front of me. It made it explicit. And when Dave and I talked about that, and what he tends to say is, but don't blame the system for, it's just a reflection of what you've already committed to. It's not the system's fault, and it's not. But that feeling of overwhelm, I think, is something when you first start out in GTD is something to be aware of. And so I'm a big fan of kind of starting incrementally, picking different areas of your life and kind of getting those into the system first until you're used to, as you say, not only capturing, but clarifying what you've captured into something and saying, what's the outcome I really need to achieve? Can I envision that outcome? Because I believe once you envision something, it's a lot easier to do it. And also, have I really figured out the actions that really move that forward? Because I think that's where GTD is brilliant. It takes the complexity of a knowledge work job like entrepreneurship or any professional role, and It forces you to explicitly figure out what you've committed to, figure out the path to completion and the actions that are required to get it done.
Mhm.
And then you can start to then just do those actions, and you don't have to be brilliant all the time to be
No.
able to go and start cranking through actions. In a
Mm.
way, it's taken a knowledge work job and it's converted it into um, an easier job that just doesn't require that level of complexity of thought
Yeah.
all the time, because we
Yeah.
we can't think deeply all day every day.
No.
There are periods of time where we can, and we can do, as Cal Newport calls, deep work, but there's a
Mm.
lot of other times where cranking through a list of items that had already been thought about
Yeah.
is an absolutely great way to operate. So
Yeah.
that's, once I kind of got there, Morton, back in, I corresponded with David a little bit in 2003, asked him some questions by email that really helped clarify that.
Mm.
And that really began my journey to GTD. And even though I've changed the way that I've implemented GTD, I started off on paper, then I went to a Palm Pilot, and then eventually I
Mm.
went to Microsoft Outlook, and now I use OmniFocus,
Mhm.
which is a fantastic product, by the way, especially if you're in a Mac environment. The the way that I've implemented my system has evolved over time, but I have actually consistently maintained my GTD system now for over 20 years.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And it's had an incredible impact on my capacity to do things that otherwise I honestly don't believe I literally would have been able to do.
Mm.
And it's allowed me to also pursue other personal projects at the same time
Mm.
and not be overwhelmed. From
Mm.
time to time, we all get overwhelmed, but I think that has been minimized.
Yeah.
And I think it's made me a better entrepreneur and also a better leader. When I not only in the startups that I ran, but for a couple of years I ran a provincial innovation accelerator agency. And when I did that, I had about 15 people reporting to me. I gave them all a copy of GTD. And
Mhm.
I said, I'm not imposing this methodology on you. That's not the purpose of me giving you this book. The purpose of me giving you Getting Things Done is to show you how I roll.
Mhm.
And because sometimes you're going to see you can tell when you're talking to somebody else or interacting with somebody else who uses a productivity methodology. You can tell there are certain signs,
Yeah.
right? And you know that they respond very quickly. Um, you can see that they're taking commitments quite seriously. They're really going to
Mm.
manage them to completion. And so those are the types of things that I wanted to instill in my team.
Mm.
Was we're professionals, we get things done, we're responsive, we don't sit on projects that are stalled out. And also when I delegated something to them, I track it in my system as a waiting for item tagged
Mm.
with their name. And
Mm.
once a week, when I did a check in with all of my direct reports, I would bring up that list. So they knew
Mm.
that every delegated item that either
Mm.
I'd sent to them or they'd sent to me was being tracked and managed.
Mm.
And so that helped keep things from falling through the cracks. So
Mm.
uh, at the end of the day, I think that's what the impact that GTD
Mm.
has had on me, to the point where now what I'm doing in my semi-retirement job that
Mhm.
I'm sure we're probably going to talk about a little bit.
Mm.
What I'm doing is so my semi-retirement job is I'm a professor in a business school at my university. Although I used to teach engineering courses, now I mostly teach business courses. And every year I offer two bonus lectures that are completely outside the curriculum. And the first of those two bonus lectures is on productivity
Mm.
and saying, hey, you're about to graduate. You've spent several years developing your skills and your knowledge, but nobody has trained you how to manage yourself as a professional.
Mm.
And so we talk about the challenges of knowledge work, that the work is not always self evident, that you're actually going to have to define your work and then do it. And the risk of, especially now in this highly competitive work environment that young people are graduating into right now, Morton, it's incredibly competitive and incredibly stressful, is how are you going to manage yourself in a sustainable way throughout the next 100 years of your professional career, and at the same time still achieve what you want to do in your personal life? Because work-life balance is a real thing, and it really is of a lot of interest to young people.
Yep.
And the problem is that you get into a highly engaged, what I call those always on 24/7 cultures, where if they email you, if somebody on your team emails you at 11 p.m. and you haven't responded by 11:05, they think you're dead, or they start texting you. And so there's a risk that students enter these kind of always on 24/7 cultures. So I do a bonus lecture on how do you manage yourself? What are the challenges of knowledge work? And I introduce the ideas behind GTD as encouraging students to say, you know what, you need a system. And it's up to you to think about that. We're not going to teach you that at university, but it's a great investment of time to invest some time to develop your productivity practice. And maybe you use GTD, maybe you use something else, but extracting some ideas and becoming kind of a student of productivity is a really great investment of time at the beginning of your career, because it's a portable skill that lasts you the entire, and I always say jokingly, the next 100 years of your professional career. But you want to work sustainably, because you mentioned before, Morton, the idea of burning out.
Yep.
And becoming so stressed. There's a high risk of young professionals finding themselves in that situation.
Yeah, they do. One of the things that we both have been doing is because in Norway here we do, when we are approached by students at universities or universities first and foremost, we do give pro bono courses for them. So that they have to pay for the course material, but we will work for free. They will pay for our travel and the materials and I know that this has had a major impact in so many of the students' lives. It's helped them. I know, because they come back later and say when they're out in the real world for the next 100 years, they have skills that will last them 100 years.
Exactly.
So, good on
they're
them.
portable skills. They're ubiquitous. They apply to every professional role they're ever going to have, as well as it enhances their personal lives. Because if you're stressed at work, it's not as if you can turn that off when you get home.
No.
So
I'm
glad you're doing that. That's amazing. You're doing that pro bono. And I think that is something that, and I, like you, I get emails and messages from students sometimes years later and saying the most impactful course or lecture that I went to at university wasn't any of my courses. It was this bonus lecture on productivity that really made me think about it. And the other bonus lecture I give is on financial independence and early retirement. And getting students to think about, in a business school, we spend a lot of time thinking about corporate finance, and we teach corporate finance. And so they're experts at doing the net present value of future cash flows, adjusted for risk and adjusted for alternative investments. But nobody is sitting down and saying, hey, you need a budget. Hey, you need to generate excess cash over your expenses. And then you need to go and invest that in something that's going to grow in the long term. And if you do that long enough and you start early enough, at some point, you're going to build up enough investment capital that will offset some or all of your expenses. And at that point, you've reached the point of what we call financial independence, where using relatively modest, safe withdrawal rates of, let's say, 4%, remaining invested in, for example, the S&P 500 index, so it's a broad-based index fund, it's a relatively passive investment approach, although you could also do real estate and things that are more hands-on, but you've built up an excess of your income over expenses. You have invested that in a consistent way over a longer term. You've now built up some assets. And one of the things I spend a lot of time talking to my students about in this bonus lecture is you don't have to wait until those assets have added up to millions of dollars to start to experience some of the benefits of financial independence. As soon as you've built up a certain amount of money, you've got now what we call FU money, which means if you're in a bad employment situation, you can say FU to your employer and go find another job and have money to sustain yourself. Or if you're in a bad relationship, you can do the same thing. And then at some point, you then have the ability to potentially reduce your work from working full-time to either working part-time or working for part of the year or doing a mini retirement where you take 6 months off every 3 or 4 years and go and explore a hobby or an interest or travel. Or you can do what I did, which was I saved up enough through my 30s and 40s that I had already funded my conventional retirement at age 65. And now we can do what we call coasting to financial independence, which is you can simply reduce your work until your income is equal to your current expenses because you don't have to save for retirement anymore.
No.
And
Exactly.
now that plan got blown away because I funded my kids' education, and one of my children got into a very expensive national academy. So I had to modify that plan a little bit because who doesn't want to support their kids in what they want to do and in their dreams? But in essence, what I did is when I turned age 50, I sat down and worked with a professional coach for a year on managing a transition from working flat out full time, either in startups that I had run, or at Veolia when I was acquired, and I stayed with this amazing organization for 5 years and doing all sorts of interesting projects, but spending a lot of time away from home. Then I transitioned to running in a provincial innovation accelerator for a number of years. But then when I turned 50, I said, hey, let's sit down and figure out a plan and of what I want to do. And I wanted to figure out a plan, Morton, that I would never want to retire from. I wanted to figure out a combination of personal and professional work that I would always find interesting, that I would always be engaged and would provide, as you said, that kind of little bit of basic stress that gets you out of bed in the morning, but allowed me to go and focus on the things that I really liked to do, that I really wanted to do, and that I was good at.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know what? I couldn't do that on my own.
No.
I fell into a trap that I think a lot of people who are either entrepreneurs or who are driven or motivated, or I think sometimes maybe it impacts men more generally because we've got some sort of midlife crisis that happens in our 50s. And rather than doing all the traditional midlife crisis destructive behaviors, I said, hey, how can I restructure my life in a way that I'm working on projects that really are related to the strengths and things that I'm consistently interested in? The problem was I was producing large lists of those projects because some part of me was feeling insecure about doing less. And I was feeling somehow that was a failure. And what I did is I connected with a very talented coach in Montana in the United States. I went to a retreat with some like-minded people to talk about financial independence and talk about early retirement. And the two are related, but they're different. There are people who focus very much on saving significant amounts of money, but they haven't thought about what they're going to do when they stop working. And that is a mistake, and that can cause a real personal crisis. And so I worked with her as a coach for practically a year on defining what that best work would be. What could I do that would bring out my best work, but then also eliminate a lot of the things in my life that I found annoying, administrative work, things like that. And the nice part of it is when you're running a GTD system, you've got all of your projects laid out. You can tell which ones are causing you resistance and not. You can feel resistance to certain projects and certain actions. And so I started going through those lists with my coach and figuring out which ones were really the ones that I wanted to focus on. And because I had taught courses at my local university to kind of keep my brain alive through my 30s and 40s, I actually had enough teaching experience to qualify for a tenured teaching only role. So I became appointed in 2018. I was appointed as a professor in the business school at Queen's University here in Kingston with a teaching only appointment. So I'm tenured on the teaching side. I have no research responsibility, and I have some administrative responsibilities. And I can teach as many or as few courses as I want under that appointment. And if I teach a couple of courses a year, it pays my expenses. I don't have to do anything else. If I want to teach more, I can. Or if I want to go and do some things outside the university, I still can. And so that's been a great appointment for me because I've been able to teach, which is something that is very important to me. I've been able to do some of the bonus lectures we've talked about with my students. And I've also been able to free myself up to do other interesting projects, both professionally and personally.
Yeah. One of the things that getting things done really benefits you. I don't know if this is something we haven't talked about, but the higher horizons, the purpose, values, principles, vision, goals, areas of responsibilities, and projects and next actions are, the high level, what I call your Himalaya mountain. One of the things that I think, it sounds like you did that with your coach, talking about what's important to you, so that when you pick something to do, it's what's most valuable for you personally. And have you done some work on the Horizons of Focus model? Have you tried that out?
Yeah, and I think it's hugely valuable. I wouldn't be surprised, Morten, if you're working with clients that is one of the most impactful things that you've done in your practice in terms of personal impact. And maybe it's worth unpacking that for a couple of minutes. And that is, the thing that hit me about this idea of horizons of focus and the way that David Allen refers to them, the runway, when you're right on the ground. I have a pilot's license, so I like the aerospace analogy. When you're on the runway, you're doing the things that are right in front of you. Those are the actions that you've captured in your system. You have created those actions from projects that are kind of that 10,000 foot level. You've got a series of projects you're responsible for. And it's great to operate at that level of, hey, I've got projects to work on every day, and I've got individual next actions. That's great. But then there's other horizons, and I think people miss the idea that there are a series of horizons that live above the project level, but not at this level of 50,000 feet where you have to have this huge existential discussion with yourself about what's my life vision and where am I going. Maybe I try to do that once in a while, but I haven't found the answers to that.
No, and what I find when I do the coaching with people about horizons of focus is that it is very little oxygen at that height. It's very difficult to think clearly about who am I really, and what is my purpose, really. And but it is beneficial to have someone with you who can ask you the right questions and unbirth that and help you find, because it's without direction, without kind of a clear understanding in your head of where you're going, you will end up somewhere either way, and you may not be happy where you are ending up. So you have to decide, where do I want to end up, and then start navigating there.
Yeah, and as you say though, Morten, one of the places that has more oxygen, it's very hard for the average person to go from thinking about the tactical things of the day to thinking about, what the purpose of their life is and their existential future. And that's where you say there's very little oxygen. It's hard to get your hands around that as a concept. But what David Allen, I think, did a great job in the original Getting Things Done book, and also maybe in his book Making It All Work, is you've also got these intermediate horizons. Hey, from where I am now, in the next 1 to 2 years, where do I want to be incrementally? What do I need to do to get there? People, I think, can have an easier time maybe envisioning the next couple of steps down the path. But then a little bit later, it's, hey, in the next 5 years, what's my life going to be like? And people can envision, well, if I'm in my mid-20s, maybe I want to be in a committed relationship, and maybe I want to start a family. And how am I going to allocate some time and energy into that aspect of my life? Or maybe there's a skill that I wanted to develop. In my late 20s and early 30s, I wanted to get my pilot's license. And I went and did that, and I still maintain it. And I upgraded my license twice, even in the last couple of years, as a fun skill development exercise. So, yeah, I think this idea of thinking through different levels and horizons of focus on different time frames in that intermediate level between projects and, what are you going to do existentially, is where I think a lot of opportunity exists for proactive planning and making sure that what you're working on doesn't just have that short-term impact all the time. It's very easy when you have a list of everything in front of you that, as David says, are the latest and loudest things.
Yep.
You need projects that have a longer time horizon to allow you that proactive element. Because if you can do that, that's going to have a huge impact.
It has for many people, and the idea is, David says very clearly and profoundly, there is always more to do than there is time, and and so to make sure that you do the right things. And so how can I figure out what is the right things to do? And then you have to figure out what is valuable for you, so you make value-based decision on what you should do and not do. And so because saying yes to something means automatically you say no to other things. Make sure that you say no to the right things and yes to the right things. And it's difficult to do that without having some vision of where you are going. What would you like your life to be, and what values and principles do you want your life to be guided by? So,
and one of the things I did a podcast with David Allen back in 2006 when he was first starting his GTD in Conversation podcast series. And I talked about how that impacted me as an entrepreneur because, in business, execution is a huge risk, especially in a startup, right? Getting, as you just said, the right things done is, in entrepreneur speak, we call that the execution phase of the business. And then David and I just recorded another podcast on the Rebel Entrepreneur podcast series, maybe about 2022, as episode 15 of the Rebel Entrepreneur podcast, and where we revisited that topic. And he said, hey, one of the things that I had taken from our original podcast way back when was this idea that execution is a huge business risk, and the potential for a startup or an early stage business to be successful has, to a huge degree, is influenced by how the entrepreneur and the startup leadership team executes the business, which ultimately boils down to how well they manage themselves.
Yep.
And I've always talked about anybody who I've talked to about productivity, and a lot of people go like, ew, productivity. I don't want to be a robot. I don't want some system telling me what to do next. And that's not the point, right? It's to free yourself up to think about that higher level work, and to free yourself up to think about how you're going to execute the business. So, some people have to get over the ooh factor, as I call it, for productivity as well. But when they do, I think when I talk to other people who I know who have implemented GTD over the longer term, over 5 or 10 years, and now it's consistent embedded behavior, and if they do stop using their system for even a couple of days. They know how to get back on track. What you find is that they've got a level of focus yet calm relaxation around them that is relatively rare in today's world, especially in the entrepreneurial world.
Yeah, but it is so needed to have success and in life and business. So
you've got to be able to manage yourself. You've got to be able to avoid being overwhelmed. You've got to be able to keep functioning personally and professionally, even when you said when you've committed to more to do than you can do. That's kind of the normal human condition in modern times. You've got to figure out a way of addressing that and managing that in some sort of consistent and sustainable way. And I think that's a question that I wish more students would ask themselves, Morton, but I also wish that more entrepreneurs would ask themselves and say, look, at the beginning of my business, this is going to happen. I am going to be overwhelmed. I need to maintain that clarity of thought, that clear head. And to do that, I need to invest some time in developing my own capacity to be productive, my own systems. I need to invest some time in that even before I maybe go down that entrepreneurial journey, because I still think a huge predictor of entrepreneurial success is the capacity of the founder, that CEO, usually sometimes a technician turned CEO, the technical founder who now finds themselves running that business. A huge predictor of success, Morton, is how well that individual manages themselves at the end of the day.
I do concur. I've seen this.
We are in
times.
violent agreement on that point, I'm sure.
Yes, we are. We are. Well, we are nearing the end of the podcast recording. We are trying to keep this in a total under an hour or just above. And with some intro and outro, we are at closing to the end. Any place that people can find you if they want to connect you after listening to this podcast? Do you have somewhere to direct them?
There's a couple of places. One is they could look at my LinkedIn profile. So they could search for Peter Gallant, and they will no doubt find me to learn more about my background. You can also message me through LinkedIn. My email address is peter.gallant@gmail.com. So GALLANT. I'm also working on a website. It's not available yet, but it'll be up in the next week or two, which is called Productive Patterns. And it's designed to capture some of my thinking about productivity in general and about how to go about implementing any productivity methodology, including getting things done. So it's not another getting things done methodology, but what it is thinking about how you actually go and implement systems to make yourself more productive. So that website is just in its final production now, so it'll be available probably in September, October, late September.
Okay, so what was the domain again?
Productivepatterns.com.
I have to write that down because I'm a GTD.
Yeah.
Patterns.com. The reason I'm asking is because both all three, the LinkedIn link and your email, and this will be in the show notes. So if you're listening to this or seeing this on YouTube, you will find the links in the show notes, so you can click and get to know Peter
very good,
a little closer or connect with him. It's been a treat talking to you, Peter. I'm sure that specifically those of our listeners who are thinking about, and I know you're out there because I talk to a lot of you that are entrepreneurial or want to be an entrepreneur, and you know, interesting to understand how can you use GTD to achieve your clear-headedness that you need to make the good the execution of your projects and your products and have success. And and then also the retirement plan. I'm sure that a lot of people would like to retire early, or at least semi-retire. I'm thinking that for a lot of people that I know, myself included, to totally retire is going to be really hard to do.
Yeah, and that's maybe not the point in the long term of doing that. So that's the amazing part is productivity methodologies like GTD help us understand that.
Yeah, they do. So, well, great talking to you. Thank you so much for wanting to play with us on this, and I wish you the best of luck with your semi-retirement and the classes you will teach in the productivity and the financial independence early retirement bonus lectures there. I'm sure they will be. You will be. A lot of people will attend them. They should make a plan for their life. So thank you so much, Peter. And hopefully we can maybe touch up again later on, maybe do a follow-up to see what you're doing in a year or 5. I don't know where we will be at 5 years, but let's have a tentative for that, if that's okay for you.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic, Morten. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you today, and perhaps the next time I'm in Scandinavia, I'll have to stop by Oslo, and we'll have to get together.
Yes, I will have a beer ready for you if you are
Very
a beer
good.
drinker. Yeah.
Yes. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Great to talk to you.
Yeah, take care. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Great interview with Peter. What an interesting guy. And again, just a reminder for us that work with GTD that we just, we're lucky because part of the job is just to hang out and meet really cool people that do cool stuff, hearing their stories, whether it's, here as part of the podcast, whether it's in trainings and coachings at the summer camp, gtdsummercamp.com. It's just really inspiring to hear how people use and benefit from GTD. Great to hear Peter's stories as well.
I do agree with you, and I think this episode has been particularly interesting for people who have an entrepreneur in their stomach that wants to become one or think about this. And this is, not a manuscript on how you can take your ideas and create something that's actually sellable for create a product out of it, and how to bring it to the market. And I hope it was interesting, and I think that we will do future episodes with people with entrepreneurship. So if you are an entrepreneur, you know GTD well, feel free to reach out to us at the podcast at gtdnordic.dk and
learning.dk.
What did I just say?
GTD Nordic. Old habits.
Old habits, hard to kick. So it's podcast at vitallearning.dk. The podcast at vitallearning.dk. My brain doesn't accept that. I'm getting old.
I think the old one still works as well. Try either one.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure. So, but either way, feel free to send us an email if you want to. You think that your story could be interesting for our listeners. And you can also reach out to us if you have a question you would like us to do in one of our listener questions episodes. So keep them coming. They are interesting, and they trigger us to deep dive into your problem, your challenge with GTD, and that's always cool for us as well. So thank you. Keep them coming.
Absolutely.
And before you take us out, I have a quick reminder about the GTD Masterclass Retreat, which is something we did in February 2025, and that was really successful. That is a retreat with you in Denmark and in Norway. It's 2 times a year, one in February, one in September, one in Norway in February, and one in Denmark in September. and it is an exclusive event. It is in a manor or a castle. You decide what you would like to go to. It's in the winter or the fall, so it's going to be beautiful winter in Norway and beautiful fall in Denmark. And it is about the higher horizons. So deep dive into the higher horizons with 11 other participants. So we have a roof of 12. It is by application because we want to screen the people we don't know. We want to make sure that this is the people that are there are the right people for the group. And it is for CEOs, managers, partners, managers who want to up their game with GTD and get to learn their higher horizons of focus more intimately. And if you are interested in this at all, feel free to head over to the landing page. It's in the show notes, both on YouTube and wherever you listen to this audio version. There will be a link to the masterclass retreat page. So do that, enjoy. I hope to see you there. And there is a dwindling number of free spaces. We are now 7 for the one in February, and we are still 150 days or something before at the recording of this before, so we only have 7 seats left. So Lars, will you take us out?
the official take us out time.
Yes.
Well, we already did part of it, and like you said, have a look at the show notes. We try to put some interesting links in there. You'll find more information about Peter as well from today's episode, link to the masterclass retreat, link to the GTD summer camp, and of course links to vitallearning.eu, because that is the landing page for all of Vital Learning across the Nordics Plus, where you can find all of the information about the different companies in the different countries, find out how to reach us if you're looking for training, coaching, and GTD, crucial conversations, crucial influence, all the other good things that we can help you learn. If you're outside the Nordics Plus, then cruciallearning.com is the place to go to find your local partners.
And gtdfocus.com if you're in Americas or in the US and Canada for coaching, if you're interested in coaching in America and Canada. I think that's it. I will do what I always have done and will continue to do, saying that until next time, stay safe and stay productive. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Skal du gå først, eller?
Det kan jeg godt. Skal jeg bare køre på?
Ja.